Welcome into another edition of the BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. Andy Barch here with AM 930 WEOL and 100.3 FM. Joined as always by Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and BrownsZone.com. Scott, we are just about one full week in to full-on practice for the Browns, and that will give us plenty to discuss today. We'll get into Mack Wilson's injury, the severity of it. We're still kind of waiting for the details on that as we record this. Olivier Vernon believes the team will be more disciplined this year. We'll find out why he thinks that. The offense looks a bit out of sync in the early stages of camp, and we also want to find out about which rookies have kind of caught your eye to this point. Before we come around to the golf shot of the week, Scott, lots to dive into today, but let's get right in to the Mack Wilson injury. I mean, we all kind of thought that Nick Chubb entering concussion protocol was going to be perhaps the biggest issue in the first week of camp. That really kind of took a back seat, though, to this Mack Wilson injury, which could prove to be huge depending on the severity of this thing.
Yeah, Bull. The news hasn't been great on the injury front for the Browns. In Mack Wilson, it's probably the biggest. I'm actually working on a little story right now. The Browns just announced that Nickelback Kevin Johnson suffered a laceration to the liver during practice yesterday. A teammate landed on him, was taken to the hospital, and that's where it was discovered. So he's going to be in the hospital for at least the next 24 hours. So, it just seems like a lot of bad news, and to some key players, right? You mentioned Chubb. Kevin Johnson's supposed to be the nickelback on this team. Then Mack Wilson, we've talked about the linebacking core a lot, Bull. It's not a deep group. It's not a proven group at all, and Mack Wilson was kind of the bell cow of that group. Even though he's a second-year guy, he started 14 games a year ago. He's got a lot of potential. So for Mack to go down, and we don't have anything definitive on how long he's going to miss, but surgery could be on the table. If that happens, he could miss the whole season. And that's a huge blow. Not that Mack is Ray Lewis, right? But if it's your best player in a weak group, that's not promising. And if he misses any significant amount of time, it really tests the depth on a group that didn't really have much depth to begin with.
And that makes it really, really tough on a unit that will certainly be tested. I mean, again, we're kind of waiting on the severity of this issue to find out just how much time he might miss. If it ends up being that he has to miss a substantial amount of time, do you think the Browns are going to keep their ear to the ground to try and find out what free agent linebackers might be available? And if so, are there any names out there that might get the fans a little bit excited in that group?
Well, that's the thing, Bull. There's not a whole lot of guys out there. Now, we have to talk about Clay Matthews III because we all know his dad had a great career here, borderline Hall of Famer, after his long, long career with the Browns. And Clay Matthews III is a free agent. And you hear his name, and because the Browns have had, questions at linebacker, he's been mentioned a bunch. So you could go make a move at Clay. Now, the problem is, I think at this stage of Clay's career, he's more of a pass rusher. And the Browns are looking for linebackers, right? Guys who can come up and play the run, especially guys who can run with the tight end and running backs in coverage. And I just don't know if that's what Matthews does best at this stage in his career. And then once you get past him, it's a lot of other guys that really don't do a whole lot for me. I think if the Browns had been impressed by a lot of guys, by anyone on this list of free agents, they might have brought him in already. Darren Lee, Ohio State, former first-rounder, was a flop with the Jets. Maybe take a flyer on him. What seems more likely to me is you wait and see who gets cut and go pick what you consider is the best of the guys to get cut on September 5th. I think that's the cut-down date. And go sign one or two of those guys and bring them in and see if they're better than the guys you have. And in the meantime, you hope that Sione Takitaki is much better in his second year, and you hope that rookie Jacob Phillips, a third-round pick out of LSU, can step into a significant role. And those are two pretty big question marks.
Two big question marks indeed, and I think we're all kind of interested to see if this team's going to be more disciplined this year than it was last year. One guy who certainly thinks so is Olivier Vernon, and he was a guy that I don't want to say he made headlines in the offseason, but maybe he made third or fourth page news as we were kind of all sitting and waiting to see what the Browns might do with his position if they're going to re-sign him. Of course, they eventually did get him to restructure his contract a bit, but he spoke up a couple days ago mentioning that he really thinks this team is going to be a lot more disciplined than they were a season ago. Why is it that he thinks that?
Well, I think it goes back to the coaching staff. And he didn't mention Freddie Kitchens by name. But when you talk about the 18 penalties week one against the Titans, that's something that Olivier Vernon brought up. And he said, man, he goes, I'd never seen that before, and I'm paraphrasing here, but his point was that was startling. And once it happened, he's like, oh. And he right away knew, man, this team doesn't have the discipline. And that goes to the coaching staff, right? I just don't think there's any way you get around that that's not a coaching staff problem. So I think the hope, and I think it's founded in reality. Not that we've seen Kevin Stefanski do a ton yet, right? Because we haven't. But watching him during the virtual offseason program, listening to how he's dealt with his team early in training camp, I think there's reason to believe he's, not to be blunt, but smarter and more disciplined than Freddie Kitchens was before him. And that should translate to the team. And I also think, Vernon made a point of talking about how the Browns in 2019 were not prepared to handle the huge expectations. And that's not as big a deal this year, just because expectations aren't that high this year because of what happened in 2019. And I don't know if that was – I would not blame all of that on Freddie Kitchens. He inherited a team that was coming off a good finish in 2018. And Baker Mayfield looked really good as a rookie. And then you trade for Odell Beckham Jr., and all of a sudden it's, oh my gosh, this team – can be a Super Bowl contender, right? That was the kind of talk out there. And the players weren't mature enough to handle it. The coaching staff wasn't mature enough to handle it. And I think I know the expectations are nowhere near the same level this year, which is good for Kevin Stefanski. And I think it's good for the team. I also think the Browns have added some quality veterans. Everybody on last year's team has another year of experience, went through that, should not get caught up in the hype as they did a year ago. So I think there is reason to think that things will be better, but until you see it on the field, until you see the penalties go down, until you see a smarter football team, you probably can't make that full assumption yet.
Well, we spent a lot of time so far today talking about the defense. We'll switch gears now, and we'll take a look at what's going on the other side of things. And so far, Scott, based on what we have seen and based on what we've heard and read, it seems like there's not a whole lot to like about what's going on the offensive side of the ball for the Browns right now. In your eyes, do you think this offense looks drastically out of sync? And if so, why do you think that might be?
I think I definitely agree with those assessments that the offense has been behind the defense, well behind the defense. Now, backup quarterback Case Keenum took issue with that when we talked to him on Zoom Wednesday. He said he thought they were trading punches, both sides were growing, both sides were making plays. Now, yes, you can point to a few plays being made here and there on offense, and I would argue that most of the plays being made have come with Case Keenum a quarterback in that second-team offense. The struggles are with that first-team unit, and part of it's Baker Mayfield. He still doesn't look completely comfortable in the pocket. I see him taking off a little early, some double clutching of the ball. I see the rookies, right, especially Jedrick Wills. It's easy to see what the rookie left tackle is doing because he's out in space. It's harder for me to gauge how rookie center Nick Harris is doing in place of J.C. Tretter, who's out after knee surgery. But Wills has had some issues early in camp. So there's pass rush in Mayfield's face, and that creates difficulties, right, as a quarterback. Now, and Baker's also been a little bit high and wide on some of these throws. And, as a pessimist in you says, man, we saw the same thing last year. A lot of Baker's throws sailed in training camp last year. And it led to, or I don't know if it led to, but as the season went on, we saw accuracy issues continue throughout the regular season. But I think we have to sit back and say this is a brand new offense, right? A brand new scheme. It's a brand new coaching staff. They didn't have any off-season practices. Baker's working on different footwork that coordinator Alex Van Pelt wants him to use. And all of those things, if you say, okay, we're going to start practicing and go be perfect in the offense, it's not going to happen. And so that's why I'm quick to say that the offense has been disappointing and has not looked sharp. But I will also say I think that was probably to be expected. And now you just hope that improvement comes quickly because, we're 3.5 weeks from opening day in Baltimore, and I feel pretty comfortable Baltimore's offense will be clicking because it's the same offense and Lamar Jackson, the MVP, is back. And the Browns have to get somewhere close to clicking to have any chance in that game. And maybe that's asking a lot. Maybe that's asking too much of a new coaching staff with a new system. But that is obviously the plan, is to hurry up and figure it out. But it hasn't been there yet. I've seen too many interceptions, too many missed throws, too many even penalties, right? Or some false starts where you have to re-huddle. It just hasn't been efficient on offense, and that's something that bears watching because, like I said, we just don't have a lot of time before these games, before the games come. There's no preseason to work out the kinks. It's going to all have to happen on the practice field, and Baker is going to have to be better, and a lot of that is just trusting and feeling comfortable in the new offensive system.
And I think that's got a lot to do with it too, right? The fact that, this is the first week of camp, a new coach, a new system, and you've got, at least a couple different pieces or parts of a new personnel regime too. Most of the same people are back, but trying to find out the way the new guys are going to fit into the system, that's got to play some kind of a role in this also. So I think part of it, too, has to do with the fact that we've been waiting for so long now to see these guys out on the field, and then when the offense gets out there, because there's at least a little bit of hype, right? You think about it, they've filled a lot of holes on offense in the offseason, so I think the expectations are going to be a little bit higher for all the obvious reasons, and maybe we just expected this immediate gratification from an offense that's been a little bit slow out of the gates, but again, when you don't practice for a few weeks together, some of these lumps they've taken in the first week have kind of got to be a little expected, don't they?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, Bull. Yeah, they should be expected. But the couple of things I keep coming back to are, Kevin Stefanski, the coach, never wanted to make any excuses. So when he would be asked, we asked him as reporters, is it going to be a struggle? How far are you guys behind? All those kind of things. And he would never even grant that as, kind of the baseline. No, I'm not going to say we're going to be behind. We're on the same, we're on a level playing field with the other 31 teams. And they didn't have off-season programs either. And they didn't have practice. Well, the reality is the Ravens and Steelers have veteran guys. And they've been together a long time. And the coaching staffs have been there for a decade, right? And the same thing with the New Orleans Saints. So a practice in May and June isn't as important to them as it is to a team with a new coach and a new staff and a young quarterback who struggled in year two, right? Those are all legitimate factors that I think we thought would be here, but some people wanted to downplay that and dismiss it. And the fact is we shouldn't have downplayed or dismissed it because those are the facts. And I think the other part of it is, Browns fans have watched Browns football for a long time, right? And they've gone to training camp, and I've gone to every training camp practice. And it's consistent over the years. No matter who the coaching staff is, no matter who the quarterback is, the offense has struggled in training camp. And that tends to be what you wind up seeing in the regular season, right? If the offense struggles and the quarterback struggles in training camp, a switch usually doesn't happen, and the games start, and the offense looks great. Now, in 2007, Derek Anderson was bad in training camp. He lost his starting job to Charlie Fry in the quarterback battle. He gets inserted in week 1. They trade Charlie Fry, and then the Browns win 10 games, right? But that's an anomaly. I think the best teams in football, the teams where Tom Brady and Peyton Manning are quarterbacking, their offense looks good in training camp, right? Because you have good quarterbacks, great quarterbacks running the system. So I just think you, as an observer, have watched bad offensive football for so long. You say, hey, this looks a lot like what I've seen in previous years. Now, again, it's a small sample size, right? I've seen 5 practices. I've seen 3 practices in pads. It doesn't mean today Baker won't be sharp. It doesn't mean there isn't a slow progression. And 2 weeks from now, with a full week and a half before the Ravens game, you feel like there's a clicking, right? And they're not just installing plays. They're really comfortable with the play calls and the system and the wide zone and all that. But through 5 days, it's been bumpy, and I just don't know. I just think you can't say, well, it'll get corrected necessarily. There's no guarantee that happens, but there's also no guarantee it doesn't happen, and there is still time for it to get figured out. But there needs to be a sense of urgency because the offense that I've watched through 5 days makes me concerned about the offense we're going to see in September.
Well, I think it goes without saying that it's going to be a heck of a lot tougher for a lot of the younger players, especially the rookies, to make a splash, considering that there are no preseason games. So these next few weeks, I think, very clearly are going to be vital for anybody in that group. Having said all that, Scott, any rookies kind of stand out so far to you through the first few days of full practices?
Hey, I will answer that, but I did want to add this caveat. Popped into my head. Nick Chubb has not been out there for the majority of these practices. Jarvis Landry is still in and out because he's coming off the hip surgery. Odell didn't practice much yesterday. J.C. Tretter's not out there, and you hope that he can be back week 1. So it's not like, it's Baker lining up with his stud skill position players, and they're running their favorite 10 plays. So, I do not want to get carried away with how bad maybe I've made it sound. And there are some extenuating circumstances. It just needs to be better, and it hasn't been good enough. And when it comes to rookies, I will mention Donovan Peoples-Jones, the 6th-round pick out of Michigan, has shown up. And probably the best play of yesterday's practice was, the Browns really often struggled in the red zone. And there was a lot of time spent in the red zone drills. And the number 1 offense struggled. But in a goal line situation, they ran a play, Baker bootleg to the right. Donovan Peoples-Jones kind of runs across the back line of the end zone, and they hooked up for a touchdown. And it's not the only time I've seen Peoples-Jones. And for a low-round rookie, if he's making up plays where I notice, that's a good sign. And he physically looks the part. 6'2", 212 or 213, I think he is. Stands out when you just look out there and look at the receivers, and he gives you the return ability, right? In the kicking game, he's going to challenge for a return job. So I've noticed him. And then tight end Harrison Bryant, the 4th-round pick out of Florida Atlantic. Not the biggest guy in the world, right? Just when you look at him stand next to Austin Hooper or he stands next to David Njoku, it looks skinnier to me. It looks a little slight. They list him as 6'5", 230, which is, it's 30 pounds lighter than Pharaoh Brown, who's also tight end. And there was a blitz pickup drill the team did yesterday, and it's tight ends and running backs versus linebackers. And I saw Bryant get blown up twice. So probably needs to get stronger. But when you watch him just as a receiver, makes plays. Made back-to-back catches in the red zone drill from Case Keenum yesterday, 4 touchdowns. One of them was contested. So he's shown up. He's got good movement skills. And that's going to be an interesting thing because the Browns have so many tight ends, and we know Stefanski's going to use multiple tight ends at a time. Bryant feels like more of the pass catcher to me. I don't know if you can line him up at the end of the line and say, go block a defensive end. That doesn't sound right, but maybe you can split him out, and he can be that second tight end, little pass-catching tight end, and I think there's some promise there.
Well, these are some names we'll certainly keep an eye on over the next few weeks of training camp as we get closer to that Week 1 matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. Hard to believe, but that's really only a couple of weeks away. The beginning of the season is getting awfully close. All right, Scott, let's wrap up by talking about this week's golf shots that stood out to you. And, well, the weather was beautiful this weekend. Ideal weather for golfing for sure. Looks like we could get more of it this weekend, too. What shots of yours stood out?
Yeah, boy, I only got one round in since we talked. That's what happens when training camp gets here. But, and I was going through, and I hit some okay shots. I didn't play particularly well. I was coming off one of my better rounds of the summer, and then just didn't play as well, didn't score as well. But one shot kind of stuck out. It was number 5 at Pleasant Valley, and it's a par 4, and there's water off the tee, which isn't an issue, and then there's water in front of the green, which is an issue. And I hit a tee shot to the right, which is not unusual for me, and I had one tree in the way, but it felt like I should be able to get over the tree. And I want to say I had, I don't know, maybe 125 to the flag, which is a pretty full pitching wedge for me, and I thought I could carry the pitching wedge over the tree. But with water in front of the green, I was debating between a wedge and a 9-iron. And just to show what an idiot I can be sometimes, I made the decision to go with the wedge. I thought, yes, it'll let me clear the tree. I think I got enough club to get to the flag. And the flag was on a little bit, so even if I hit it 120, I thought it would clear the water. Well, I hit the shot, and it just ticks the top of the leaves at the top of the tree I'm aiming over, and it flies over, and it goes over the pin to maybe 12 or 15 feet. Good shot. I wound up 2-putting for par. I looked down at the club as I go to put it back in my bag, and I'd actually hit the 9-iron instead of the wedge. So the wedge probably gets there and probably clears the tree. Maybe the leaf took a couple of yards off the 9-iron. It was a well-struck shot, but I guess it just, again, goes to show there's plenty of luck involved in this game, and I need a better caddy.
Hey, better to be lucky than good sometimes, right? Especially when it comes to golf.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Good stuff. Well, hopefully you're able to get out there and play a couple of rounds this weekend. Weather looks like it's going to be fantastic for the next few days anyways. Scott, as always, great to catch up and look forward to doing this again next week.
Me too, but we have plenty to talk about. Another probably 5 practices by then.
Well, and let's hope that the offense looks a little bit sharper by next week as well. All right, again, that's Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, and the Medina Gazette, and, of course, at BrownsZone.com. That'll wrap things up today on our BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to all of you again next week.